Growing up, you probably thought you were the problem, the unlovable one. But here is the brutal truth. Your toxic family didn't choose you to be the scapegoat because you were weak. They chose you because you were the only one strong enough to see through their lies. Picture a typical family dinner. To an outsider looking through the window, it looks completely normal. But if you look closer, you can feel the silent, suffocating tension in the room. On one side of the table sits a child who only has to breathe to be praised. Every minor achievement is celebrated like a miracle. On the other side of the table sits you. You could bring home perfect grades, clean the entire house, and do everything right, yet your efforts are met with a dismissive sigh, an eye roll, or a harsh critique of the one tiny thing you forgot to do. The silence you receive is heavy. It is a punishment for simply existing. For a long time, you internalized this. You thought, if I just try harder, if I just become better, maybe they will look at me the way they look at them. But the favoritism in your living room was never an accident, and it certainly was not about your behavior. In psychology, we understand this not as simple bad parenting, but as a highly calculated system of control. When you are raised by narcissistic or emotionally immature parents, the family dynamic operates less like a nurturing home and more like a miniature cult. It is a closed system with an authoritarian leader and strictly assigned roles that you are not allowed to step out of. To maintain absolute power and avoid facing their own deep-seated shame, the toxic parent splits their children into two distinct extremes. First, there is the golden child. This child is not loved for who they are, but for what they represent. They are the extension of the parent's fragile ego, the shiny trophy presented to the outside world, groomed to reflect perfection. Then, there is the scapegoat. That is the role you were forced into. Every dysfunctional system needs a psychological dumpster, a place to project all the anxiety, anger, and failures of the parent. You became the designated emotional punching bag. Whenever something went wrong, you were the convenient target. You were conditioned to carry the weight of the family's sins so the parent would never have to look in the mirror. And the most insidious part of it all? The gaslighting. If you ever dared to point out this glaring inequality, you were met with the ultimate lie. They would look you right in the eye and say, "We love all our children equally. You're just too sensitive. You're always causing drama." That lie was designed to make you question your own sanity. It was designed to make you hate yourself, instead of realizing that the game was rigged against you from the very beginning. You were never crazy. You were living in an invisible war zone. And the reason they fought so hard to break you down is because they subconsciously knew you had the power to break their system. Growing up, you probably looked at your sibling, the golden child, with a heavy mix of envy and deep resentment. They got the praise, the affection, the financial support, and the benefit of the doubt. They seemed to get the exact version of your parents that you spent your entire childhood begging for. You wanted to be them. But what if I told you that the golden child is actually living in a terrifying psychological prison? A prison with golden bars, but a prison nonetheless. To understand the tragedy of the golden child, we have to look past the superficial rewards and examine the brutal condition of that love. The truth is, the golden child is not actually loved for who they are as a unique, flawed human being. They are loved exclusively for what they can do and what they represent. To a narcissistic or toxic parent, this child is not an individual. They are a mirror, a status symbol, an extension of the parent's own fragile ego. Every trophy they win, every perfect grade they achieve, every compliment they receive from the outside world is absorbed directly by the parent to make themselves look like a spectacular caregiver. The affection the golden child receives is entirely transactional. It is not a warm, unconditional embrace. It is a paycheck for a flawless performance. In psychology, this destructive dynamic is known as enmeshment. In an enmeshed family, there are zero emotional boundaries between where the parent ends and the golden child begins. The child is absolutely not allowed to have their own authentic thoughts, separate values, or unique desires. If they want to be an artist but the parent demands a lawyer, the child's dream is quietly and systematically suffocated. Slowly, their true identity is hollowed out and replaced by a carefully constructed mask designed solely to appease the parent. They become an empty vessel, carrying the weight of the parent's unfulfilled ambitions. And the psychological pressure of wearing this mask every single day is horrifying. While you, the scapegoat, were criticized for everything, the golden child is carrying an impossible burden. They are not allowed to be human. They are not allowed to fail. They are not allowed to be sad, anxious, or angry, because their negative emotions threaten the parent's carefully curated delusion of a perfect family. Think about the dynamic in your home. The golden child watched what happened to you. They saw the rage, the isolation, the silent treatments, and the cruelty you endured every time you were deemed bad. That wasn't just a punishment for you, it was a terrifying warning for them. They learned very early on that if they ever step out of line, make a mistake, or show a flaw, they could easily become the next scapegoat. They live in constant, silent terror of losing the only source of survival they have ever known. From the outside, it looks like they are being spoiled. But this toxic pampering is actually a sophisticated form of sabotage. By doing everything for them, shielding them from the natural consequences of life, and micromanaging their choices, the toxic parent deliberately cripples the golden child's ability to function independently in the real world. They are taught that they are inherently superior to everyone else, yet completely incapable of surviving without the parent's constant guidance. The golden child never learns how to self-soothe, how to handle rejection, or how to discover who they truly are when nobody is watching. Their soul is being consumed every single day to feed the parent's ego. You envied them because you saw the love they were getting, but you didn't realize they were paying for that love with their absolute freedom. You were pushed out into the cold, yes, but they were swallowed whole. If you were the scapegoat, there is one specific question that has likely haunted you for as long as you can remember. In the quiet moments of the night, you have asked yourself over and over again, why me? As a child, you naturally blamed yourself. You scanned your personality and your appearance, looking for the fatal flaw that made you so unlovable. You thought maybe you were too loud, or too quiet, too rebellious, or simply not smart enough. You convinced yourself that you were fundamentally defective, and that if you could just fix that broken piece inside of you, the abuse would stop. But here is the psychological plot twist that changes everything. You were not chosen to be the scapegoat because you were weak, flawed, or inferior. You were chosen because you were the strongest person in the room. In clinical psychology, we call the scapegoat the whistleblower of the toxic family system. Narcissistic families operate entirely on a shared delusion. They require every member to wear a mask and pretend that the family is perfect, that the abusive parent is always right, and that the dysfunction does not exist. It is a house built entirely on secrets and lies. But then you came along. Even as a young child, you had a high level of intuition and emotional intelligence. You could feel the hypocrisy. You noticed when words did not match actions. And most importantly, you could not bring yourself to blindly comply with the delusion. Whether you openly argued against the unfairness or simply withdrew and refused to play the game, your very existence became a massive threat to the narcissistic parent's absolute authority. You were the only one who saw the emperor had no clothes. And in a toxic system, the person who speaks the truth is always treated as the enemy. They had to tear you down because your independence terrified them. If they could convince you, and the rest of the family, that you were crazy, unstable, and the root of all the family's problems, then they would never have to face their own toxicity. This brings us to one of the most powerful defense mechanisms in human psychology: projection. Narcissistic parents carry a deep, subconscious well of self-hatred, insecurity, and shame. But their fragile egos cannot handle processing those dark emotions. So, what do? They take all of their own flaws, their own failures, and their own toxic traits, and they psychologically vomit them onto you. When your parent called you selfish, they were projecting their own profound selfishness. When they called you manipulative, they were projecting their own manipulation. When they looked at you with absolute disgust, they were not seeing you. They were looking at a mirror reflecting their own inner ugliness, and they were punishing you for making them see it. You became the human dumping ground for the emotional garbage your parent refused to carry. All those years, you thought your rebellion was proof that you were a bad kid. But your rebellion was actually your immune system fighting off a psychological virus. Your anger, your talking back, your desire to escape. That was your soul fighting to stay alive in an environment designed to crush it. You did not break. You refused to be assimilated into their sickness. And for that incredible display of strength, you were punished. You were never the problem. You were the only cure the family violently rejected. If you grew up as the scapegoat, it is incredibly difficult not to harbor a deep, burning resentment toward the golden child. After all, they were the ones receiving the warmth and approval that you were quite literally starved of. But here is one of the most devastating truths about your family dynamic. Your sibling was never your true enemy. The intense rivalry, the jealousy, the silent wars between you, none of it was a natural accident. It was carefully and deliberately engineered. In the psychology of narcissistic abuse, this tactic is called triangulation. It is a highly manipulative strategy where a toxic parent refuses to let two people communicate directly or form a healthy, independent bond. Instead, the parent intentionally inserts themselves as the ultimate middleman. They control the flow of all information, they twist the narrative, and they ensure that every single relationship in the house revolves entirely around their approval. Think back to the relentless comparisons you had to endure. How many times were you told, "Why can't you just be more like your brother?" Or, "Your sister never gives me this much trouble. What is wrong with you?" These were not harmless parenting techniques designed to motivate you to do better. This was a psychological weapon known as divide and conquer. By constantly measuring you against the golden child, the parent ensured that you felt fundamentally inadequate, while simultaneously inflating the golden child's ego to keep them hooked on the parent's praise. The toxic parent created an artificial environment where love was treated as a scarce, highly competitive resource. Instead of being a team, you were forced to fight your own flesh and blood just to get a few crumbs of basic affection. But triangulation goes much deeper and much darker than open comparisons. It thrives in the shadows through calculated smear campaigns. You know what the parent said to you about the golden child. But have you ever stopped to wonder what the parent was saying to the golden child about you? Behind closed doors, the narcissistic parent was busy painting you as the villain of the family. They told your siblings how difficult you were, how much you hurt the parent, how unstable, dramatic, and ungrateful you were acting. They weaponized your normal, healthy reactions to their abuse and framed them as undeniable proof of your toxicity. The parent played the role of the tragic, long-suffering victim, and you were cast as the abuser. Why would a mother or a father intentionally destroy the bond between their own children? Because there is nothing a narcissistic authoritarian fears more than a united front. If you and the golden child ever actually sat down, communicated directly, and compared your experiences, the illusion would shatter instantly. You would both realize that the parent is the common denominator of all the chaos in the family. By keeping you at each other's throats, the parents successfully diverted your anger away from their own abusive behavior. They made you hate each other, so neither of you would ever hold them accountable. You were both pawns on the exact same chessboard. One of you was painted white, the other was painted black, but you were both being moved by the exact same toxic hand. The moment you truly internalize this, the blinding hatred you hold for your sibling begins to dissolve. You start to see the tragedy for what it truly is. You didn't lose a sibling to a natural rivalry. You were robbed of one by a parent who needed to play God. We have finally arrived at the ultimate question. When the dust settles, when childhood ends and you both enter the real world, who actually wins? If you look at the psychological trajectory of both children into adulthood, a profound and shocking reversal takes place. I am going to tell you a secret that will fundamentally change how you view your entire past. Are you ready? The worst thing that ever happened to you, being utterly rejected by your own family, was the exact and only thing that could save your life. Let's look at what happens to the golden child when they finally leave the toxic household. For their entire life, they were treated as a flawless extension of their parents. But the real world is not their parent. The real world does not care about their fragile ego, and it will not bend backward to accommodate their entitlement. When the golden child faces their first real failure, a rejection from a job, a breakup, a harsh critique from a boss, the psychological collapse is often catastrophic. Because they were never allowed to develop a core identity separate from their parents, they have no internal compass. They do not know how to self-soothe. Worse yet, because they were raised on a diet of transactional, conditional love, they often grow up to perpetuate the exact same toxic cycles. Without intense therapy and self-awareness, the golden child is at a remarkably high risk of becoming a narcissist themselves. They won the battle of childhood, but they are terrifyingly ill-equipped for the war of adulthood. They remain forever chained to the expectations of the family system. Now, let us look at you, the scapegoat. There is no denying that what you went through was agonizing. You were starved of affection, constantly criticized, and made to feel entirely alone in the world. But hidden inside that brutal rejection was the greatest gift you could have ever received, the gift of freedom. By being pushed to the outer edges of the family system, you were saved from being completely consumed by it. Yes, they threw you out into the cold, but being thrown out of a burning building is the only way to survive the fire. You were forced to hit rock bottom, but on that solid rock, you were free to build a life that actually belongs to you. You were not exiled, you were evacuated. In psychology, there is a beautiful concept known as post-traumatic growth. Because you had to survive a psychological war zone, you developed superpowers that the golden child could never even dream of. That hypervigilance you used to read your parents' moods, that has evolved into an elite level of intuition and emotional intelligence. You can walk into a room and instantly read people's true intentions. That immense pain you carried, it carved out a deep well of empathy inside your soul, allowing you to connect with others on a profoundly authentic level. And because you had to build your identity from absolutely nothing without anyone holding your hand, your resilience is practically unbreakable. The toxic family system tried to convince you that you were the cursed one, but history, psychology, and reality tell a completely different story. The scapegoat is not the cursed child. You are the cycle breaker. You are the chosen one. They tried to bury you, but they didn't realize you were a seed. There is a fantasy that keeps the scapegoat trapped for decades. It is the desperate hope that one day the toxic parent will wake up, realize the immense pain they caused, and finally apologize. But to truly heal, you must embrace a brutal but profoundly liberating concept: radical acceptance. You do not need their apology to finally close the saddest chapter of your life. The truth is, they cannot give you the closure you are looking for. For a narcissistic parent to admit that they destroyed your childhood, they would have to face their own overwhelming shame, and their fragile ego simply will not allow it. Waiting for them to change is like drinking poison and expecting them to get sick. So, what do? You grieve. In psychology, this is known as ambiguous grief. It is the agonizing, confusing process of mourning parents who are still physically alive, but emotionally dead to you. You have to allow yourself to cry, not just for the pain you endured, but for the safe, loving childhood you fundamentally deserved but never received. You have to let the fantasy of the happy family die, so that the real you can finally begin to live. Once you accept reality, you must protect your hard-earned peace at all costs. For many survivors, this means establishing firm boundaries, whether that is low contact or walking away completely into no contact. When you do this, society will try to guilt-trip you. People who grew up in safe, loving homes will say things like, "But they are still your family," or "You only get one mother and father." Let them judge. Forgive their ignorance, because they have never lived in your war zone. They do not understand that for you, walking away is not an act of anger or cruelty. It is an emergency act of self-preservation. You do not owe your sanity to the people who broke it. You have spent your entire life as a supporting character in their tragedy. But the pen is now in your hands. You are no longer the unwanted child at the dinner table. You are the cycle breaker. The love, the warmth, and the validation you have been begging for your whole life. You are now fully capable of giving that to yourself and to the chosen family you will build along the way. If you are watching this and you were the scapegoat of your family, I want you to know something very important. I see you. Your pain was real, your anger is justified, and your future is entirely yours. You are no longer alone in this. Please, leave your story in the comments below. Let this space be the validation and the community you never received growing up. And if you are ready to continue this journey of healing, to break the generational trauma and finally take your life back, hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting started. You survived the war. Now, it is time to win the peace.